Two best friends, one white, one black, step into a high-end restaurant in matching suits, but only the black man is stopped with a ridiculous excuse: the wrong tie. After a tense standoff, the manager reluctantly seats them, then tries to buy their silence. What he doesn't expect is a video going viral. The truth won't stay buried, and the racists are about to pay the price. Before we dive in, what time are you listening? Where are you from? Drop a comment below and tell me. The champagne bubbled over the rim of Malik's glass as he raised it toward the floor-to-ceiling windows of their downtown office. 23 floors below, the city hummed with evening traffic, but up here everything felt suspended in golden possibility. To 8 years of grinding, Malik said, his voice carrying the weight of every late night, every rejected proposal, every door that had taken 3 knocks instead of 1 to open, and to the biggest contract this firm has ever seen. Ethan clinked his glass against his partner's, grinning with the kind of uninhibited joy that Malik envied, the joy of someone who'd never had to calculate the cost of celebration. $2.3 million, brother. We made it. They had indeed made it. The Fortune 500 consulting contract spread across Malik's mahogany desk represented validation that went beyond money. For Malik, who'd grown up in Detroit watching his father work 3 jobs just to keep the lights on, it was proof that the Harvard MBA had been worth the student loans that still haunted his credit report. For Ethan, whose Connecticut suburb childhood had been lined with achievements that led naturally to the next, it was simply the logical next step. You know what this means, Ethan continued, loosening his tie with one hand while scrolling through his phone with the other. We're dining at Le Bernardin tonight. I've been trying to get a reservation there for 2 years. Le Bernardin. Malik knew it well, or rather knew of it well. The kind of place where a single entree cost more than his mother's weekly grocery budget, where the wine list read like a European history textbook, and where discretionary seating meant exactly what you thought it meant. That place. Malik set down his glass, studying his partner's face. After 8 years of friendship, he could read Ethan's expressions like stock charts. The excitement was genuine, but so was the unconscious assumption that doors opened the same way for everyone. You sure about that? Come on, man. We just landed the biggest deal of our careers. If not now, when? Ethan's smile faltered slightly. Unless you don't want to go. Malik walked to their shared bookshelf, running his fingers along the spines of business journals and legal texts that documented their journey from startup to success. Between corporate strategy and merger negotiations sat a small framed photo, him and Ethan at their first client meeting, both nervous, both determined, both believing they were building something that mattered. I want to go, Malik said finally. But I want to try something first. Try what? Malik turned back to his partner, and something in his expression made Ethan set down his phone. An experiment, call it market research. What kind of experiment? The kind that tests whether their no discrimination policy is worth the paper it's printed on. Malik's voice carried no anger, just the clinical precision he brought to their most difficult negotiations. We're going to dress identically. Same suit, same tie, same shoes, everything. Ethan laughed, but the sound died quickly when he realized Malik wasn't joking. You're serious. Dead serious. Black suit, white shirt, red tie, polished black Oxfords. We arrive separately. See what happens. Malik, come on. It's 2024. These places what? Malik's eyebrows rose slightly, have evolved beyond human nature, beyond the unconscious biases that every study shows still exist. Ethan ran a hand through his sandy hair, a gesture Malik recognized as his processing mode. You really think they'd? I think, Malik interrupted gently, that you and I have been friends for 8 years, business partners for 6, and we've never once talked about why I check my appearance twice before client meetings, while you roll out of bed looking like a GQ model. The office fell quiet, except for the hum of the air conditioning. Outside, the city continued its evening rhythm, oblivious to the tension building 23 floors up. Okay, Ethan said finally, let's say you're right. Let's say there's still that kind of thing happening. What then? Then you buy dinner, and admit that systemic bias isn't some liberal conspiracy theory. And if you're wrong, Malik smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Then I'll stop bringing up racial dynamics in our diversity training sessions, and you can keep believing we live in a post-racial America. Ethan extended his hand. Deal. They shook on it, but as Malik felt his partner's firm grip, he wondered if Ethan understood what they were really betting on. This wasn't about a free dinner, or proving a point. This was about whether the American dream they'd both chased looked the same from different angles. As they packed up for the evening, Malik caught his reflection in the darkened window. Same suit, different world, that's what his father used to say. Tomorrow night, they'd find out just how different those worlds really were. The following evening, Malik stood before his bedroom mirror, adjusting his red silk tie with the precision of a surgeon. In the reflection behind him, his wife Sarah sat on their bed, watching him with the expression she wore when she sensed trouble approaching. "Baby, you don't have to prove anything to anybody," she said, her voice carrying the weight of 20 years of knowing him, of watching him navigate a world that too often made him justify his presence. "I'm not proving anything," Malik replied, smoothing the lapels of his charcoal black suit. "I'm just documenting." "Documenting what?" "That some folks are still stuck in the past. We already know that." Malik turned from the mirror to face his wife. Sarah's beauty hadn't dimmed in their 15 years of marriage, but her eyes held a wariness that hadn't been there when they'd first met in law school. The wariness of a woman who'd watched her husband succeed in spite of, not because of. "Sarah, this contract changes everything for us. For our kids. But if we're going to play in these circles, really play, not just be tolerated, I need to know what we're walking into." She sighed, rising to adjust his tie even though it was already perfect. "Just, be careful, okay? Some fights aren't worth winning. And some fights," Malik said, kissing her forehead, "are worth having." Across town, Ethan was having a decidedly different conversation with his wife Jennifer as he fumbled with his identical red tie. "I still don't understand why you're doing this," Jennifer said from their walk-in closet, emerging with a necklace that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. "It seems like you're looking for problems that don't exist. Malik thinks they exist. Malik sees discrimination everywhere. Maybe that's his thing, you know. Some people need that narrative." Ethan paused in his tie-tying, studying his wife's reflection. They'd been married for 12 years, raised 2 kids together, built a comfortable life in their suburban bubble. But sometimes, like now, he wondered if they'd been having the same conversation all these years or just parallel monologues. "Jen, what if he's right? Then you'll learn something, and life will go on." "Honey, you're overthinking this. Just go have dinner with your friend." As Ethan finished dressing, he couldn't shake the feeling that just having dinner had somehow become the most loaded phrase in the English language. Le Bernardin rose from the downtown district like a monument to refined taste, its understated elegance speaking in whispers rather than shouts. The kind of place where the real power players went to be seen not seeing each other. Ethan arrived first, as planned. The moment he approached the glass doors, a hostess materialized with the practiced smile of someone trained to assess net worth at 20 paces. "Good evening, sir. Welcome to Le Bernardin. Hi, I have a reservation for 2. Ethan Morrison, 7:30. "Of course, Mr. Morrison. Right this way." The hostess, blonde, immaculate, probably fresh out of hospitality school, led him through the dining room with its soft lighting and hushed conversations. Crystal glasses caught the light like tiny prisms, and the air carried the scent of expensive wine and even more expensive cologne. "Your server will be right with you," she said, seating him at a prime table near the window. "Can I start you with anything to drink?" "I'll wait for my colleague, thanks." "Absolutely. Take your time." Ethan checked his watch. 7:28 p.m. In exactly 12 minutes, Malik would walk through those same doors wearing an identical outfit. For the first time since agreeing to this experiment, Ethan felt his stomach tighten with something approaching dread. At 7:40 p.m., Malik approached Le Bernardin's entrance with the measured pace of a man who'd learned to telegraph his intentions well in advance. Same suit, same tie, same polished shoes. The only difference was the color of the skin beneath the expensive fabric. The same hostess looked up as he approached, but her smile faltered for just a fraction of a second, a micro-expression that spoke volumes to someone trained to notice such things. "Good evening," Malik said. "I'm here to join my colleague, reservation under Morrison." The hostess glanced at her screen, then at Malik, then at the screen again. "I'm sorry, sir, but I'm going to need to speak with my manager about your attire. My attire. Our dress code is quite specific, and I'm afraid your tie doesn't meet our standards for evening service. Malik looked down at his red silk tie, identical to the one that had passed inspection 40 minutes earlier. Could you be more specific about the violation? Sir, if you could just wait here for a moment. The hostess disappeared into the restaurant's interior, leaving Malik standing in the foyer like a defendant awaiting verdict. Other guests passed by, a older couple in evening wear, a group of businessmen laughing at some private joke, and he felt their glances like physical weight. The manager appeared within minutes, a thin man in his 50s with the kind of practiced authority that comes from years of managing difficult situations. Good evening, sir. I understand there's some confusion about our dress code. There's no confusion on my end, Malik replied evenly. I'm wearing a business suit and tie to join my colleague for dinner. I'm afraid the tie doesn't meet our evening standards. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable in our lounge area. The requirements are more relaxed there. Inside the dining room, Ethan caught sight of the commotion through the glass partition. His colleague stood in the foyer, immaculate in his identical attire, being told he wasn't dressed appropriately for a restaurant he'd already been seated in. Something twisted in Ethan's chest, a combination of shame, anger, and the sickening realization that he'd been living in a different reality than his closest friend. He stood and walked to the foyer, loosening his red tie as he went. "Excuse me," Ethan said to the manager, his voice carrying an edge that surprised even him. "I'm Mr. Morrison, this is my colleague, and frankly I'm confused about why his tie is suddenly problematic when mine was fine 40 minutes ago." The manager's expression shifted into damage control mode. "Sir, I assure you our policies are applied consistently." "Then you won't mind if we switch ties?" Ethan interrupted, pulling his tie free from his collar. "Right here, right now." Before anyone could respond, Ethan handed his tie to Malik, and took Malik's in return. They performed the exchange in the restaurant's foyer, two successful businessmen reduced to a sidewalk shell game with neckwear. Malik knotted Ethan's tie around his collar with deliberate precision, then looked up at the manager. "Better." The manager's face went through a complicated series of expressions before settling on forced accommodation. "Of course, sir. Right this way." As they walked to their table, Malik's phone was already recording. The dining room of Le Bernardin hummed with the low conversations of people comfortable in their privilege, but Malik heard only the sound of his own pulse as he settled into his chair across from Ethan. His phone, propped discreetly against the wine list, captured everything. "Jesus Christ," Ethan whispered, still processing what had just occurred. "The same fucking tie." "Same tie," Malik confirmed, his voice steady. "Different skin." Their server approached, a young woman with the kind of bright smile that suggested she either hadn't witnessed the foyer incident, or had been trained to pretend otherwise. "Good evening, gentlemen. Welcome to Le Bernardin. Can I start you with something to drink?" "We'll need a moment," Malik said, not looking up from his phone screen. "Of course, take your time." As she walked away, Malik angled his phone toward Ethan. The screen showed a split-screen comparison. Ethan's smooth entry at 7:30, and Malik's interrogation at 7:40. Same suits, same ties, wildly different reception. "Fuck," Ethan breathed, staring at the footage. "I mean, I knew racism existed, but this blatant, in 2024, blatant." Malik's eyebrows rose. "Brother, this was subtle compared to what our parents faced. At least they let me in eventually. After we switched ties. Which is," Ethan trailed off, the absurdity of it hitting him fresh, "which is completely insane." Malik set his phone down and really looked at his friend, this man he'd built a business with, shared dreams with, trusted with his family's financial future. Ethan's face held the expression of someone whose foundational assumptions about the world were cracking in real time. "You want to know what's really insane?" Malik asked. "This happens to me regularly. Not exactly like this, but the extra scrutiny, the second guessing, the assumption that I don't belong until proven otherwise. Why didn't you ever tell me?" "Tell you what?" "That I have to dress better, speak more carefully, smile more often just to be considered equal to you on your worst day." Malik's voice carried no accusation, just bone-deep wariness. "What would you have done with that information?" Ethan started to respond, then stopped. What would he have done? Offered sympathy, made awkward jokes, changed nothing substantial while feeling slightly guilty. Their server returned, notepad ready. Have we decided on drinks? Actually, Malik said, his voice taking on the tone Ethan recognized from difficult client negotiations. I'm curious about your wine selection process. Do you have different recommendations based on, say, customer demographics? The server's smile flickered. I'm sorry, sir. My colleague here was offered your premium wine list immediately upon seating. I'm wondering if I'll receive the same consideration, given that we're dining together. Of course, sir. All guests receive equal service. Right. Malik's smile was sharp enough to cut glass, because your dress code policy is applied so consistently. The server glanced between them, clearly out of her depth. I'll get the sommelier. That won't be necessary. Ethan interjected. We'll just take a bottle of the 2018 Chablis. After she left, Ethan leaned forward. Malik, maybe we should just what? Pretend this didn't happen. Order our overpriced fish and go home to our respective bubbles. Malik's voice remained level, but his knuckles were white around his water glass. Ethan, do you understand that this isn't about dinner? This is about every boardroom, every country club, every exclusive venue where success is measured, not just by what you've achieved, but by how comfortable you make other people feel about your achievements. Before Ethan could respond, a new figure approached their table, the manager from the foyer, flanked by what appeared to be a senior colleague. Gentlemen, the manager said, his voice dripping with false warmth, I wanted to personally apologize for any confusion earlier. Perhaps we could offer you a complimentary dessert course, and naturally we hope you'll keep tonight's minor misunderstanding between us. We value our reputation for discretion. Malik looked up from his phone, where the tie switching footage was still visible on the screen. Discretion. These things can be misinterpreted. Social media, you understand. Sometimes a simple policy misunderstanding gets blown out of proportion. Misunderstanding, Malik repeated slowly. Is that what you're calling it? The senior manager stepped forward. Sir, I assure you that Le Bernardin serves guests of all backgrounds equally. Perhaps there was some confusion about our evening dress requirements. No confusion, Malik interrupted, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had helped him close million-dollar deals. Your hostess told me my tie didn't meet standards. When my colleague wearing the identical tie switched with me, suddenly it was acceptable. That's not confusion, that's discrimination, and it's documented. The managers exchanged glances. The foyer incident had been witnessed by other guests, and in an age of smartphones and social media, plausible deniability had become a luxury few establishments could afford. Perhaps the senior manager said carefully, we could discuss this privately, in my office. Malik smiled, the same smile he wore when clients tried to lowball their consulting fees. I think we've discussed enough tonight. Enjoy the rest of your evening. As the managers retreated, Ethan stared at his friend with something approaching awe. You just dismissed them. I dismissed their bullshit, Malik corrected. There's a difference. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the evening settling around them like fog. Finally Ethan spoke. What happens now? Malik picked up his phone, the footage still playing on a loop. Same suits, different treatment. The evidence was undeniable, digital, shareable. Now, Malik looked up at his friend, this man who was finally seeing the world through a different lens. Now we find out what equality actually costs. By 11 p.m. that same night, Malik sat in his home office uploading the footage to every social media platform he could think of. The video was stark in its simplicity. Two men in identical attire, receiving completely different treatment, based solely on the color of their skin. He typed the caption with deliberate care. Same suit, same tie, same reservation, different skin, different rules. This is 2024 in America. Same suit challenge equality isn't optional. Sarah appeared in the doorway with 2 cups of coffee, settling one beside his laptop. You sure about this, baby? I'm sure, Malik said, his cursor hovering over the shares button. The question is whether America's ready to look in the mirror. He clicked. The video uploaded. Within minutes, the first comments appeared. By morning everything had changed. Malik's phone had been buzzing continuously since 6 a.m. The video had gone viral overnight, not the modest viral of a few thousand shares, but the explosive kind that crashes servers and dominates news cycles. 2.3 million views, 847,000 shares. Comments ranging from outraged support to predictable denials, to threats that made Sarah insist on changing their home security codes. Ethan called at 7:15, his voice tight with anxiety. "Have you seen the news? Which channel?" "All of them." Malik switched on CNN to find his own face staring back at him. The Chiron Red viral video exposes restaurant discrimination. A panel of experts was already dissecting the footage frame by frame, analyzing the micro-expressions of the hostess, the manager's defensive body language, the stark contrast in treatment. "Jesus," Malik muttered. On screen, a civil rights attorney was explaining the legal implications. "This isn't just about one restaurant or one incident. This is systematic evidence of the kind of discrimination that the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was designed to prevent. When you have identical circumstances and different treatment based solely on race, that's textbook discrimination." Malik's phone rang again. This time the caller ID showed a number he didn't recognize with a 404 area code. "Mr. Washington, this is Rebecca Chen from CNN. We'd like to interview you about last night's incident." The next call came from NBC. Then ABC. Then reporters from newspapers he'd only read online, podcasts he'd never heard of, and something called The Root that Sarah told him was important. By noon the story had evolved beyond the original incident. Investigative reporters had started digging into Le Bernardin's history, and what they found painted a disturbing pattern. 3 former employees came forward with stories of discriminatory training, subtle guidance about which guests should be seated where, which reservations could be accidentally lost, which complaints should be taken seriously. The restaurant's corporate headquarters issued a statement that managed to be both defensive and apologetic. "Le Bernardin is committed to providing exceptional service to all guests regardless of background. We are investigating this isolated incident and will take appropriate action to ensure our standards are consistently applied." Isolated incident. The phrase made Malik laugh bitterly as he watched their stock price drop 12% in trading. But the real earthquake came at 3 p.m. Malik was in his office fielding calls from reporters when Sarah burst through the door holding her laptop. "Baby, you need to see this." The screen showed the exterior of Le Bernardin, where a crowd of protesters had gathered. But more shocking than the protesters was the scene playing out on the restaurant's front steps. The regional director of the parent company, flanked by security guards, was publicly firing the manager who had overseen the previous night's discrimination. "Mr. Peterson," a reporter shouted, "are you taking responsibility for the discriminatory treatment captured on video?" The manager, Peterson, looked haggard, his earlier composure completely shattered. "I was following company policies. I was trained to." He stopped himself, but the damage was done. "Trained to what?" another reporter pressed. Peterson's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Then, as security began to escort him away from the microphone, he shouted the words that would become the story's defining moment: "I was just following company culture." The phrase hung in the air like a confession, an admission that the discrimination wasn't an aberration but a feature. The crowd's reaction was immediate: shouts of outrage, demands for further investigation, calls for boycotts that would prove devastatingly effective. Malik closed the laptop, suddenly exhausted. He'd wanted to document discrimination, not destroy lives. But as he thought about Peterson's final words, he realized that some systems could only change when their hidden mechanisms were dragged into the light, no matter how ugly the exposure. His phone buzzed with a text from Ethan. "Holy shit, did you see?" Malik typed back, "Yeah. It's not about Peterson anymore." "What do you mean?" "I mean the whole damn industry is about to get audited." And he was right. By evening, competitors were rushing to review their own policies. Corporate lawyers were working overtime to scrub training materials for discriminatory language. The phrase company culture had become radioactive shorthand for institutional bias that could no longer hide behind individual bad actors. The Peterson firing had been meant to contain the crisis. Instead, it had confirmed everyone's worst suspicions about how deep these problems ran. As Malik sat in his living room that night, watching the news coverage with Sarah, he felt the weight of what he'd unleashed. This was no longer about a dinner reservation or a tie that matched his friends. This was about forcing an entire society to confront the lies it told itself about equality and progress. "You okay?" Sarah asked, curling up beside him on the couch. "I don't know," Malik admitted. "I thought I was just proving a point to Ethan." Now there are congressional hearings scheduled, and Peterson's probably never going to work in hospitality again. Baby, you didn't make Peterson discriminate against you, you just made sure the world saw it. Malik nodded, but the responsibility felt heavier than he'd anticipated. Tomorrow he was scheduled to testify before a House subcommittee on civil rights. Next week, the Justice Department was opening a formal investigation into the restaurant industry's practices. A simple dinner had become a reckoning. His phone buzzed one more time. A text from an unknown number. "Thank you for your courage. My son is 16, and because of what you did, maybe the world will be a little fairer when he's ready to walk into these places wearing his own suit. A grateful father." Malik showed the message to Sarah, who smiled through tears she hadn't realized were falling. "That," she said, "is why you had to do this." Outside, the city continued its evening rhythm, but something fundamental had shifted. The same suit experiment had ended, but the same suit movement was just beginning. 1 year later, the morning sun streamed through the windows of the Washington Community Center, illuminating a scene that would have been impossible to imagine a year earlier. The building had been constructed on the exact spot where Le Bernardin once stood, funded by the $4.2 million settlement from the class action lawsuit that followed Malik's viral video. Inside the center's main hall, 24 young entrepreneurs, black, white, Hispanic, Asian, everything, sat around tables receiving business mentoring from established professionals. At the front of the room, Malik adjusted his tie and checked his presentation slides one final time. The same red tie. He'd kept it, along with the suit, hanging in his office with a simple placard, "Different treatment ends here." "Ladies and gentlemen," Malik began, his voice carrying easily through the room. "A year ago, I thought discrimination was something that happened to other people, in other places, in other times. I was wrong." In the audience, 16-year-old Marcus Johnson shifted nervously in his seat. He'd won the community center's essay contest, "What Success Means to Me," and the prize was a new suit for job interviews, plus mentoring from successful business owners. But sitting here now, surrounded by accomplished adults, he felt like he was wearing someone else's dreams. "The same suit experiment taught me something important," Malik continued. "It's not enough to succeed individually. If the system is rigged, then individual success is just an exception that proves the rule." Marcus raised his hand tentatively. "Mr. Washington, what if you're not sure you belong in these spaces? Like, what if you get the interview, but you're worried they'll figure out you don't really fit?" The question hung in the air, heavy with the weight of every young person who'd ever felt like an imposter in spaces designed for others. Malik set down his slides and walked closer to Marcus's table. "Son, can I tell you something? I have an MBA from Harvard, I run a multi-million-dollar consulting firm, and I still sometimes wonder if I belong in certain rooms. You want to know what I learned that night at the restaurant?" Marcus nodded. "I learned that belonging isn't about fitting in, it's about showing up authentically and demanding that the space expand to include you." Malik paused, studying the young man's face. "What size suit do you wear?" 40 regular." "Perfect, same as me." Malik walked to a closet at the back of the room and emerged with a garment bag. Inside was a charcoal suit, not the same one from that night, but its spiritual successor. He held it up against Marcus, checking the fit. "This is yours now, but it comes with a responsibility." "What kind of responsibility?" "The responsibility to remember that you've always been good enough. It's the world that needs to catch up." As Marcus stood to accept the suit, his hand shaking slightly with the weight of the moment, the room erupted in applause. But the real moment came when Marcus looked up at Malik and asked, "Will you teach me how to tie the tie properly?" "Son," Malik said, placing a hand on the young man's shoulder, "I'll teach you everything I know." Later that afternoon, Malik and Ethan sat in their renovated office, now expanded to include a pro bono division that provided business consulting to minority entrepreneurs. The walls were covered with photos, clients they'd helped, young people they'd mentored, and in the center framed copies of the legislation that had emerged from the congressional hearings, triggered by one night's viral video. "You see the Times article this morning?" Ethan asked, scrolling through his tablet. "Which one?" "The follow-up piece on the restaurant industry changes. Bias interruption training is now standard at 87% of major chains. The same suit test has become an actual auditing tool for civil rights organizations." Ethan looked up from his reading. They're calling it the most effective discrimination awareness campaign since the lunch counter sit-ins. Malik nodded, but his attention was focused on the window overlooking the community center. Through the glass, he could see Marcus and several other young people practicing handshakes and interview techniques with volunteer mentors. "You know what's funny?" Malik said. "I thought I was just trying to prove a point to you that night." "What point was that?" "That the playing field wasn't as level as you thought." Ethan set down his tablet and looked at his friend, really looked at him. "I was an idiot, you were uninformed. There's a difference." "Is there? I mean, we'd been friends for 8 years, business partners for 6. How did I not know?" Malik considered the question carefully. "Because the system is designed to be invisible to people it works for. That's what makes it so effective. And now we make it visible. One suit, one interview, one opportunity at a time." Ethan's phone buzzed with a notification. Another restaurant chain had just announced mandatory bias training for all employees, the 5th such announcement this month. The same suit experiment had become a movement, and the movement had become institutional change. Malik Munn, "Yeah, that night at Le Bernardin, when we switched ties. I keep thinking about that moment." "What about it?" "The look on your face when they let you in. You weren't surprised, you were resigned, like you'd been expecting it all along." Malik was quiet for a long moment, remembering the weight of that evening, not just the discrimination, but the exhaustion of having to prove, again and again, that he deserved the same basic respect as his white colleagues. "I was," he said finally. "That's what hurt the most. Not that it happened, but that I wasn't shocked when it did." "I'm sorry." "For what?" "For living in a world where you had to expect that. For not seeing it sooner. For," Ethan trailed off, struggling with words, "for being part of a system that made you have to document your own discrimination just to be believed." Outside, Marcus was practicing his firm handshake with a volunteer mentor, the new suit hanging perfectly on his teenage frame. The sight made Malik smile, despite the heaviness of the conversation. "You want to know what I'm sorry for?" Malik asked. "What?" "I'm sorry it took a viral video to start this conversation, but I'm not sorry we're finally having it." As the sun set over the city, casting long shadows through their office windows, Malik and Ethan sat in comfortable silence. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, more young entrepreneurs to mentor, more discriminatory practices to expose, more systems to change. But tonight, for the first time in a year, the weight of that responsibility felt shared. On the wall behind Malik's desk, the red tie hung in its frame, a reminder of a night when two friends learned that equality wasn't a destination but a daily choice to see the world as it really is, and then work to make it better. The same suit experiment was over. The same suit movement would continue as long as there were young people like Marcus who needed to be reminded that they'd always been good enough. It was just the world that needed to catch up.